In this video, I'm going to be talking about architecture, and this is coming from somebody that has no training or experience on the topic. I'm not that well informed. I'm simply an observer. I'm deeply interested in architecture, and so I'm looking at it from a point of view that isn't shaped by the studies, by the field, by the academics, by the traditions, by the history. So I'm certain I'm going to get a lot wrong and that I lack the context for understanding half of these things. But in the exercise, in the sake, in the spirit of conversation and dialogue, I am making this video as a time capsule of how I'm engaging with the language of architecture. There might be translational issues. I might not fully comprehend the topics or the words, but I'm giving you my view on what these architects are communicating, and I'm telling you how I understand these things because I've come to the realization, and this really the reason for this video. I've come to the realization that architecture is so much more than just the design of a physical building. It is the design of the future of life itself, the texture in which we live. And so, therefore, it is arguably one of the most important things in the world. And so, I just want to start off by saying that I'm taking this seriously, but I'm not informed, and I don't think that discredits me. To me, you just have to then treat this video as a reflectional, philosophical kind of partaking in architecture, and not something that is rigorous and something to study. But yeah, let's go forward. So originally, I was just looking at the word, right? I'm looking at architecture. I see arch. I see chi, as in energy. I see the start of the word chimera, chi, and then I see tec, the start of the word technology, and the suffix ure, which means the action or process, result of action or state. And all of these things to me make sense to be in there. They are what architecture is. The arch represents the physical design. The chimera is the fusion of two things and making something alive. Chi, energy, kind of going alongside that. Buildings contain an energy and they inspire a certain behavior through their atmosphere. Technology is forever ingrained in architecture, from whether it's new materials and techniques to technology to architecture itself being a technology. And then the suffix brings it all together. This is not a still, stagnant thing. Architecture is an action, it's a process, it's also the result of the action, it is the state of being, it is being itself. To say all that, Freemasons also believe in a grand architect. That's kind of how they name and understand the creation of the universe. Everything is through architecture. And so that's kind of the framework I'm thinking within. And so I come to this assumption that architecture is predictive. It tells you before, and it is diagnostic, a Gnostic diagram. I don't know what that word is. Those two words are there. But architecture is predictive and diagnostic. That's the assumption. It is chimerically deciding the URE, the state of being of a building. It determines the parameters and the reality of its existence. It does the same to the future. Not its abstract essence, but the physical material experience of the future. That is, in Mass Effect, not the architecture of a single building, but of a city, a car, a radio, a couch, a person. And therefore, ugly architecture is the result of an architect who sees the ugly and therefore makes ugly fate. If the architect's vision is purely observational, he then is forming the future or simply giving the future a physical. He's simply a mirror. If the architect is diagnostic and predictive, he is an oracle, or he perhaps is deciding the future. Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy, or is it seamless participation in what's already existing? Is he imposing his will, or is simply an empty vessel that's untainted, reflecting the world onto itself? The architect, and I use that as a unit of all architects into one, like one unity, one group, the group of architects, right? So the architects of the world decide the past, the present, the future. But more than that, it decides the texture of those things, which is an actual reality. Industrialization was, then brutalism became. Brutalism is industrialization. Then the industrial brutalist worker was the human. Cause and effect here are not clear. Both the chicken and the egg were present always. Once a thing begins, it's forever always existed. There is no longer a point in time without it. Brutalism is now. It was once. Brutalism will. But once brutalism is, it was never brutalism was. The architect must be infused with the timely. The contemporary must be his referential past, and the past must be the rules and things to break and steal from. The architect's timeliness is not only physical and observable in the materials and processes, but also in the philosophy, meaning that his philosophy, his approach to design, the language he uses is also a reflection of the zeitgeist that he lives and participates in. But so is also all the physical aspects, the materials, the techniques. Those are contemporary, or at least they're encouraged to be contemporary. And if they're using something that's older, they're encouraged to recreate it, reinvent it, come up with a unique way to use it. In Bauhaus, I'm calling it Bauhausianism as a term here. Here, there is only focus on function. The artist is hired to simply communicate function and is indifferent to the form that follows. The Bauhaus becomes the IKEA. It is a maze, and the customer is the minotaur. The lifeless furniture must convince you to bring it out and escape. Okay, this is my understanding of Bauhaus. Okay, and I have some images here to talk to you about. These are by Walter Gropius, who is the founder of Bauhaus, right? And looking at Bauhaus architecture, that's just kind of how I feel about it. That it's uniquely about function and that it is indifferent to form. The form simply is what is spit out by the function. We are focused on the function. To me, that's my personal opinion on what is being communicated, because I think that Bauhaus architecture is innately ugly, and I think it was meant to be. I think it was meant to be plain, boring, and industrial. It was meant to be a communication of that. Okay? So we see here this first building. Everything straight lines, squares, hardly a triangle, rectangles. To me, this is purely for function. There are some balconies out of necessity, perhaps, out of just incorporating some design elements. And this is not to say that it is absent of complexity. I think this is extremely complex. It's just that the thing that it represents and it communicates is already uninteresting to me or ugly to me, which is industrialization. And so therefore, the thing that supplies that function perfectly, to me, is then also going to be ugly. And to me, that's an inevitable conclusion, and we see it here. The next building, this is his office. Again, I am not the biggest fan. I think it is so empty and lacks a soul. To me, it makes me imagine a mundane life, a life lacking abstract ideas, thoughts, chaos. It's too perfect. It is too straight lines and rectangles and squares. It has no curvature. It creates a texture that is uninterested in texture itself, in the ambiance, in emotional things. To me, it makes complete sense that it comes out of Germany in the industrial period. To me, it is almost robotic. It is the assembly line. I think the use of color at the very least is interesting, but it seems to me that Bauhaus consistently uses similar colors of blue, these blues and these mustard yellows, and then these oranges. Perhaps there are elements here that I am completely unaware about, but even, by the way, even the photograph having the clouds being kind of obstructed in the sense that their form is not as clearly defined, brings more attention to the form of the building. So this almost becomes to be a background, because to me, Bauhaus is so unnatural. It is so man-made that if clouds had their distinct form here, where there's curvature, there is, how one cloud integrates into another, and it's not really clear where it begins and where it ends. It, fuses in and out. All of that is anti-Bauhaus design. To me, Bauhaus is extremely Apollonian. It is very much not Dionysian. It is something altogether different. I don't think it works that well with nature, which is why I don't think the tree being here matches. I think it's just meant to be perfectly cut lawn, and I think that the clouds being obstructed and not being visible and it just becoming the background is again also congruent with that philosophy of Bauhaus. Another one here. To me, this is like, this is meant to be forever and always like affordable housing. And I'm not saying that as a moral opinion or take, but in its design, it's like the worker of industrialism is simply that in its personality. And it's does this space does not aspire to think beyond that parameter. Very little color, purely for the sake of an accent color. It just serves the function. It is purely focused only on function. And so in that sense, depending on your own philosophy, that is perfection in design. I saw a lot of this growing up, by the way. These this type of this like glass that you actually can't see through, but it's glass because everything on the other side is, you can't tell what it is. I grew up seeing a ton of this, and I don't know, it was where I grew up a signifier of wealth to have a home that was designed this way. And so in a sense, my opinion of it as a kid was a little, it was, I wouldn't say I had a high opinion of it, but it definitely wasn't a low opinion. It seemed to me like the people that lived in them were purely focused on output as well. And that's kind of fascinating. Like people who are worried about exactly how much money they make, optimizing their career, doing the best they can, being financially successful, having the best engineered car. To me, this is very focused on just, again, function, function, function. But yeah, to each their own, man. To each their own. Yeah, that was the last one. So peace out to all y'all.